Hey there, Jim Johnson for accenthelp here. And in my last video, I was going into different realizations of the T sound. And somebody said, well, this one that you talked about, that the voiceless tapped R, I don't think you can do that when it's between two vowels. So let me explain what that is, and then we'll do it, basically. So the tapped R is what I like to use for that D-like sound between two vowels when you're going from a stressed syllable into an unstressed syllable. So this would be water, or really, really commonly, this is used with like theater students, which is the area that I work in, to do things like Beddy, Bodder, bought some butter. And so the mistake, well, number one, let's talk about why I like to use this one. There is, like, the Cambridge Pronouncing Dictionary likes to use a T and then put the diacritic for voiced underneath it. The reason I don't like that so much is the realization of that Betty is not, it doesn't build up to be a plosive. So some people are like, well, don't say a D there, say a T there. This is actually one of the examples I use all the time to be able to talk about issues of how, if people don't have like a word for it, a way of naming something, they can't conceive of it. And so part of why I want people to learn more about phonetics is not so much to be able to transcribe things, because I don't transcribe that much. I just transcribe specific things that I'm working on, that I'm trying to clarify for myself. So the reason that I think it's helpful to get into phonetics for clarification of concept is there's a difference between a T and a D and this thing that's in between. So I like to use the tapped R. It exists in Spanish, for example, which is the language other than English that I'm most familiar with. So I use the example of the word but, however, pero, and you could bring this if you just say pra, pro. For some people, it's more of a challenge to do that there, so they have to put a vowel between the P and the R. Put a. So it could be like put on, put on. And that's why I think it's a tapped R. And I think the idea that it's a T or a D is locked in this mindset that, well, we don't do a tapped R. And it's like, well, actually we do in English. We don't recognize it as one of the sounds, and therefore we can't hear it as that. So we go, oh, well, it's a D. So the mistake that I think a lot of people guide their students towards is to say, well, don't say Beddy Bodder bought some butter. Instead, say Betty Botter bought some butter. But then the problem is you don't sound like a human being. So that doesn't work. So what I think is helpful is to realize the reality is that you're not saying Beddy Botter, you're not building up that pressure. Instead, you're moving through it, this tap or flap R on the consonant chart, this tap or flap R here. This is what I think is what's going on. And so it's this right hook, or this fish hook. So I think this fish hook is the most accurate thing that we have to describe what's going on there. Now, rather than saying, so for example, in the play Arsenic and Old Lace, there's a joke that's made about a person who's a theater critic, and it's brought up earlier in the scene, and then when she's leaving the scene and she wants to insult her fiancé, the worst insult she can come up with is to call him a critic, right? Well, the audience isn't going to know what the heck she said. You critic. And I worked on a production where the director was like, no, it's not a critic, it's a T instead of a D. So then the actress goes, you critic. And then it became like, wait, what are you saying? But I can't give the note because it's right, is what the director's thinking. But the reality is she was saying this, not this. And so what I would want her to do is this devoiced. So this is the diacritic for devoiced. Critic. And I think that you can do this, even though it's between two vowels. I just did it, so I have a feeling that it exists. But I'm not building up pressure, so it's not you critic. And we do that when we're leading into a stressed syllable. So like attack, that's a T. But attic, that's where we tend to do, most people in the States at least, will do a tapped R. Attic, attack, attic. So it's when you go from a stressed syllable to an unstressed is when it usually occurs. I think this also may be the thing that happens with the word to or today, tomorrow. When you say, do you want to go today? Do you want to go to the store? Do you want to go tomorrow? Go to, go to, go to. I think it's the tendency to do that, as I just did. The tendency to do, tendency to do. Cool. Okay. So the devoicing is simply to go, sometimes to guide people towards this, because I do work with actors to try to get towards this sound for doing a more gentle T, for example, when they're doing something like RP. Rather than Beddy, Bodder, Beddy, Bodder, to go Betty, Botta, and rather than going Betty, Botta, where they're overdoing that T, which is a tendency for Americans trying to take that on, we want to find a gentle version of it. Betty Botta bought some butter. Betty, Betty, Betty. And I would love for actors to work on that, but not to work on Betty Botter, because that's an overdoing of it, and you don't sound human. Whereas Betty Botter, you critic, the audience hears a T. So you help the audience to get that it's critic instead of critic. They hear this instead of this because you did this instead of this. Okay. So I do think that that voiceless tapped R is very much doable, and I work with people to do it all the time. So that is the way that I would like to express that very gentle T. One of the things that I'm trying to get away from is even my habit of referring to it as the tap or flap R, but just to refer to it as, oh, we're going to do that flap there. We're going to do that voiceless flap there, or that tap there, that voiceless tap there. Get away from referring to it as an R, because that's what locks some people's brains into it, and they can't do it because they're thinking of it as an R instead of thinking of it as, it's almost like it's a gentle T. Sometimes when I even just talk about it as a gentle T that doesn't build up the explosion, which is a voiceless tap, that is when people tend to get it and be able to do it. So it's part of getting the mouth to do some of these actions is actually to train the brain to be able to perceive them. For more info on accents for actors, check out accenthelp.com.